It is 2 o'clock on the dot my time, so I think we should get started just to make sure that we have time to cover everything we want to cover and have a good conversation around it. I'm sure folks will continue to join, but in the meanwhile, Emily and I can launch in. I'm going to share my screen with all of you. All right. And, oh, we've already started the recording. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We are super excited to have all of you here to have this conversation. My name is Leana Mayzlina, and I'm joined by Emily Flores, and we'll be talking about wholehearted training, fostering connection, compassion, and joy in digital literacy. Your audio and video are turned off by default, and we ask you that you please not turn them on so that it doesn't interrupt the presentation. And then you can see at the bottom here, we have some hashtags that you can use if you want to tweet about this conversation or any of the other ones happening today. All right, we started the recording. Thank you to the founding partner, San Jose State School of Information. And we will launch right on in here. So I am Leana Mayzlina. I am the Senior Program Manager at NTEN. NTEN is an organization based in Portland, Oregon. We're a nonprofit, and we help other nonprofits use technology more effectively to meet their missions. The main part of what I do is I manage our Digital Inclusion Fellowship, and that is a one-year professional development program that trains and supports nonprofit professionals in designing and implementing digital literacy programs across the country. So through that program, we work with many, many libraries and many library staff, but the program is not exclusive to that. So we also work with housing authorities, we work with adult literacy organizations, we work with social services agencies, city governments, and several others. And during the year that we're working with them, the main part of my job is to support and train the fellows to build digital literacy programming in their communities. So throughout the presentation, I'll be speaking more from a train-the-trainer perspective, since my job is essentially to support the trainers who are then training their communities.
And my name is Emily Flores. I work at the San Antonio Public Library here in Texas. I'm a training officer, which is kind of a weird title, but basically what we do is anything related to adult basic education. So we have a drop-in center, and we provide one-on-one and small group training. On most days, what that translates into is digital literacy training, assisting people with job applications, ESL, citizenship, etc. And I will be speaking today from a client or patron training perspective.
So before we get into the material of today's presentation, we just wanted to ask what you would all like to get out of this and any key questions that might come up for you. And to the best of our abilities, we'll try to cover that just to make sure that we are talking to the topics that are of interest to everyone else on the call. And whenever you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to chat it in. You don't need to wait until the end. And as long as it's on topic to what we're talking about, we'll try to address them as we're able. And so while all of you chat in your ideas about what you want to get out of this, we'll keep going and then come back to make sure that we're covering those topics. So we first felt like it was important to define wholeheartedness as we see it and as we're thinking about it in this presentation. So we opted for using Brene Brown's definition. And she defines wholehearted living as engaging in our living from a place of worthiness. It means to cultivate the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. And so for our specific context, we wanted to make it a little more tangible and a little more honed in than that very broad definition, because after all, we only have half an hour. So we're focusing on 4 key areas. We're focusing on connection, compassion, gratitude and joy, and resilience. And a line, sort of a cross-cutting line that goes through all of those is that our shared humanity comes first. So we all work in organizations that certainly have rules and regulations and ways of doing things. But we really want to focus on the fact that outside of what we are meant to do or what we should be doing, we really want to emphasize that our shared humanity with the people we're serving is what tops the list of what of how we want to approach our work.
Okay, so for the purposes of this presentation, when we talk about connection, we're talking about that energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship.
So from a train-the-trainer perspective, when I'm working with the staff that are then going to be training their communities, there's a few key aspects that I like to think about. The first one is the importance of having support networks and learning communities. Having that really helps build connection around all of us who are doing this work. And one way of doing that is through regular and required instances of interaction. It would be really nice if this sort of happened organically and we just all felt connected and we felt like we were being supported, but sometimes you sort of have to force it in the beginning before it becomes habit. So one way we do this with the fellowship program is we have sort of mandatory regular group calls for all of the fellows that are on a monthly basis. We have an online discussion board that we encourage folks to use to get support and to learn from each other. We have also tried lots of other things like a Slack channel where folks can communicate, regional check-ins, in-person check-ins, all kinds of different modalities. But the thread between all of them is that we have to set up those regular instances of interaction and have someone facilitate them to make sure that they become habitual and there's something that we can have support us long-term. And what really helps make those interactions successful is that we remember that we are really focused on our shared goals. So we all come from different backgrounds. We might have different projects that we're trying to accomplish. But the number one goal that we all share is supporting our clients or our patrons or our communities, whatever word you use in your context. And as long as we can remember that our shared goal is the same, and that's teaching our communities digital literacy and making sure they have the skills they need, it's much easier for us to support each other and learn from each other. The other important piece is having safe spaces, because this work, as much as it would be nice for it to be all rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, it's not always, and there's sometimes struggle and there's shame around things that aren't working well or things that could be done better. And so one of the ways that we encourage that is by having humility in what we don't know, and just being honest and that this is something I'm struggling with. I would really like support. And that sort of helps all of that shame subside so that we can support each other in our shared struggles. And a great example of that is one of the fellows a couple of years ago had an issue where she was trying to run a class and she had done all the things right. She had done all the marketing, all the outreach, all the coordination with partners, and no one was coming to the classes. No one was showing up. She had done a survey around the best times that folks could show up. She knew the teachers were good, and she was not understanding why folks weren't coming to the classes. And so, we had a safe space where she could ask that kind of question and say, I'm really struggling. I'm really embarrassed that I feel like I'm on a sinking ship and I don't know how to handle this. And a few other folks came to her rescue and shared their own struggles with her. And she very quickly realized that the big challenge was how she was framing, or what the words that she was using to talk about the classes. I think she had them listed as computer literacy training, which a lot of people didn't find very exciting or attractive. And as soon as she changed the language to learn how to make a postcard for your grandkid, or how to create a flyer for your pet sitting business, then people started coming because they understood what the purpose of the class was. And so just acknowledging her struggle and her shame in that kind of safe space opened up the opportunity to create connections with other people who could then support her in overcoming those challenges. And lastly, it's really important to prioritize support and cheerleading over more traditional supervision and management. So as much as I think the default is to go to, you know, the formal structures of, did you do this thing? I'm gonna try to micromanage all of these little pieces. A lot of the time what people need is a lot more of the connection piece and feeling supported and like they have a cheerleader and there's someone who is helping guide them, but also on their team. And that tends to help a lot in making us all feel connected and collaborative.
Okay, so connection from the perspective of a trainer, someone who works with patrons, it really goes beyond a Me Too approach. It can be useful to share your experience, and I probably do this most often when I have a patron who's struggling with the job application process or talking about job interviews. But in general, I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not about us. And it's not just, oh, you know, I experienced that as well. It really goes beyond that. It's important to mention that technology and wholeheartedness are not mutually exclusive. In fact, it's been my experience that people learn technology most effectively when it's approached with wholeheartedness. And to second what Leana said, framing the experience as a mutual journey can be helpful. Anyone who works in a library knows that people think, you know, everything about everything, and of course that's not the case. There's such a variety of tasks that people need help with. So you can't commit, I can't commit to being knowledgeable about every job application process for every company, but I can and do show willingness to learn side by side with the patron. An example of this is a patron I have who had been coming to the Learn centers because he wanted to learn how to use computers so that he could sell items on eBay. So I was able to find some eBay tutorials online and shared the few experiences I had had as a buyer on the site and what made them positive or negative. And obviously this is going to be a different process for each of us. I think library staff and staff in general, each person has a different level of comfort with sharing with patrons, but it's important to do that while, of course, maintaining that professional relationship. One more point that I'd like to make is that, as Brene Brown says, we need to honor our struggle by sharing it with someone who's earned the right to hear it. So at the library, we have a lot of people who come in for just a quick one and done task, right? They need to print something, they need to get an application in, and that's valid too. So it's not about forcing a connection. You certainly don't want to be overbearing, but when there are those opportunities to connect, especially with our regulars, we try to do so. Next. As far as compassion, Brown argues that we can't practice compassion toward others until we practice self-compassion, which of course is easier said than done. And in order to understand compassion, she encourages us to look at its Latin roots, meaning to suffer with someone.
And I just saw a chat from Andrea pointing out that she doesn't know anything about cars, and everyone has things they don't know. That is absolutely true. And that is the perfect segue to the next thing I was going to say. Thank you, Andrea, which is around compassion in train the trainer settings. And that is that we really need to learn compassion for the learner because we are all learners. We would not all be in this presentation right now if we didn't all consider ourselves learners and teachers of different things. And so what really helps in my experience is to think of ourselves when we are in a situation where we might be teaching something or sharing some information, is that we are facilitators and not owners of knowledge. So our job is to share what we know, but also help find the resources for what we don't know, to connect other people who know, and to make sure that knowledge is being spread, but not that we are in a position of power relative to everyone else and we know everything. And that really helps remember the learner's journey and be compassionate in that sense. I also feel like there's a certain harm that we can perpetuate in creating hierarchies of expertise when we position ourselves over other people. And so what really helps with remembering that we all have something to bring to the table is that we are all experts on our own experience. And while I might feel like I know a lot about a certain topic, I'm also not an expert on an experience someone else has had. They might know so much more than I do about, experiencing homelessness or about selling something on eBay. So part of that compassion piece is definitely remembering that we're all learners in this. And Katie, yes, 100% agree. We get this question a lot, is really helpful. Another thing that feels really important in bringing compassion to our work is avoiding comparison. Everyone's journey is unique. I am reminded of this every time I work with the fellows, because we just, in the last cohort, for example, we had one person participate that was managing a rural library in Southern Oregon that didn't even have a restroom. They literally had a porta potty outside of the restroom. So you can imagine that the context there was very different than Emily at the San Antonio Public Library, or another fellow that we had working with the Cleveland Housing Authority, or working in Cleveland with a housing authority rather. So while we all have similar goals, we really can't compare our journeys because they're so unique. And it doesn't really help us when we feel like someone is doing a better job or someone is farther in their numbers, because at the end of the day, we're all succeeding in our own different ways and we're learning different things. Another key piece that we've learned is that sometimes goal setting can just be good enough. It does not have to be perfectionist goal setting. So we still want to be ambitious. We still want to strive to challenge ourselves, but we don't need to set goals that are, honestly unfathomable and that are going to make us feel not awesome if we don't meet them. So set goals that are challenging and that you have to push for, but that still feel like they're reasonable. And then lastly, we are all humans outside of our jobs, and we bring our whole selves to work, whether we like it or not. Someone might have a family member that is sick, or they had a terrible morning because they got coffee spilled on their sweater, or their child is home from school. There's so many different things that are going on in people's lives. And so having compassion for that and understanding that that's just our reality is really helpful. We've had some of our fellows bring their babies to our group calls, and it just honestly just makes them that much better, because we remember that outside of our experience in our work, we also bring so much other experience. And yes, daylight savings time. I agree with you. Crankiness all around. Bring your whole self. All right.
Yeah, I was confused today when I went to lunch because I hadn't changed the clock in my car yet. So yeah, makes me cranky too. When I'm working with the public, I try to think of compassion as a relationship between equals. Sympathy is not the same as empathy, and I think we all understand that. But when in our line of work, we see people who are in difficult situations, and you're often not seeing them at their best. In my job, the people who come in needing assistance with a digital task are often coming in as a last resort, often because a family member has not been able to help them, or was not able to help them for whatever reason, or they've been trying to do something on their cell phone, like a job application, and they're not getting anywhere. So it's important to recognize that you may not be seeing people, of course, at their best, but at the same time, I do try to set boundaries You can't be everything to everyone. And this was something I struggled with quite a bit at the beginning. Often individuals need a wide range of services, from housing to employment to medical and legal services. And I think this is where the importance of being connected to the community and updated on what resources are available comes in. If you can refer individuals to a community resource, or even better, do a soft handoff where you put them on the phone with someone who can assist them via telephone, you're not leaving them empty-handed. So I do always try to do that, provide people with at least a resource so that they're not going away empty-handed in the case of it being a task that I really cannot assist them with. And to speak to Leana's point of being good enough, this is so true. I try to focus on progress, not perfection, and encourage our patrons who are learning to use a computer to do the same. That progress may well be invisible to the eye. And a great example of this is I have a gentleman who's been coming in for almost a year now, 5 days a week, and he comes in for 3 or 4 hours to practice his typing. And when he first came in, and I saw that he was improving his typing skills, I encouraged him to move on to the next skill, and I would ask him if he was ready to learn about email and if he wanted to explore navigating the internet. And he was very polite, but he made it clear that he really was not interested. So once I realized he was not interested, I realized he was clearly getting something out of it, and that the comfort of coming every day and working on something for him was enough, and it was what he needed and it was what he wanted. And then eventually he showed me his statistics, his typing statistics, and of course they were incredible, and that was what he was really motivated to come in to work on every day. Thanks. So gratitude and joy. So these are really closely related. Brene Brown says that joy is not a constant. It comes to us in moments, often extraordinary moments, but sometimes we miss out on the bursts of joy because we're too busy chasing down the extraordinary moments. She said, I believe a joyful life is made up of joyful moments, gracefully strung together by trust, gratitude, and inspiration.
So when we work with other trainers and the staff, as Emily read in that quote, we really try to prioritize having gratitude for the mundane. So I think it's natural for all of us to wait for that really magical moment when the mayor shows up to our ribbon cutting ceremony, or when we graduate an entire class of students, or we win a huge grant, or whatever it is. It's natural to want to celebrate those things, and they definitely should be celebrated, but there's so many little things in between that make our work life so much more joyful. And expressing gratitude for those things is a really key part of that. An example that I have here in the photo that you see is Samuel, who's in the top left corner. On the group call that he facilitated, wanted us all to do an icebreaker that was a toast to ourselves, where we toasted to one thing that we are really grateful for and proud of for the last year. And that was really, really special. Everyone had a moment to reflect on something that was really important to them. And some of them were really big things, like having a baby. Some of them were just having a really tasty cup of coffee in the morning. All of those are equally important, because if they contribute to your joyfulness, that's what matters. And to that point, a lot of time this doesn't come naturally to us. As I was saying with connection, sometimes we have to work consciously on creating those habits because they are not completely natural to some of us. And so sometimes that's asking, like, can we start each meeting with 5 minutes of gratitude? Or if you have an internal communication channel, maybe that's chatting when you appreciate something that a different staff member did. All of those little things feel really tiny. They're the mundane, not extraordinary moments, but yet they help build a culture of appreciation over time, where it becomes more and more natural for you to express that gratitude. And long term, it creates a lot of change. And lastly, something that Brene Brown talks about a lot is practicing gratitude versus just having an attitude of gratitude. So, you know, an attitude, we can all say like, yeah, I'm grateful for everything, right? But practicing it is actually saying it aloud, or having a gratitude journal, or having folks come into class and like write down a gratitude list. All of those things can help us actually be practicing it and not just thinking about it in our minds.
So one way to practice gratitude is to celebrate student achievements. And this doesn't just mean someone who's gotten the job, or in the case of my citizenship students, someone who's passed the citizenship interview. This also includes what Leana calls those mundane, everyday achievements. So that could be making your first resume, or like Elva was saying in the chat, how she likes to celebrate those kind of small victories. Sometimes I'll have patrons who are really excited because they were able to log onto the computer for the first time by themselves. So they didn't have to go get someone or wait for a staff member to help them do that. And that's huge. This little picture that you see here is one of our digital inclusion tracks. These were part of my fellowship project, which we had different tracks for different computer skills. But Leana had a really great idea to make it a scratch-off card. So we got these scratch-off seal stickers, and every time a patron finishes one of the lessons and completes the skill check, they get to scratch it off. So it's a really fun way to celebrate that milestone and for the patron to keep track of their progress. Something like that, it was not expensive because we do not have a big budget. And it just kind of adds a fun touch a lot of times. So a lot of times fear and anxiety will keep people from really celebrating achievements because there's this sensation that the other shoe's about to drop, or it's too good to be true. Brene Brown talks about how for a lot of people, acknowledging how grateful they are, they feel that that's an invitation for disaster. One of the ways that we can provide these, or provide students with opportunities to celebrate these achievements, is providing opportunities for public recognition. So that can be a small reception. I'd like to organize an event for my students who have completed the certificate program, or have a little graduation ceremony, or even something as simple as putting their names in a newsletter. For a lot of people, that's really meaningful. Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. We are really gonna have to talk quickly.
Okay, so resilience, just very quickly, Brown speaks of these protective factors that help people to bounce back from negative situations. Okay, Leana, I'll let you continue.
I don't know that I can go into this, but whoops, sorry, went too fast. Key part of resilience is we do not have to be the experts on everything. What we can bring to the table is knowing how to be resourceful and problem solve. We can stay curious instead of jumping to judgment. So when something is not working, maybe asking questions around, why isn't this working? Why are you struggling? In what ways can I help you? Can be easier than saying like, oh, you're not doing this right, or oh, you're not interested in this. I had a great example for that one, but I'm gonna skip it. Being willing to ask for help, and then leaning on the support networks that we talked about earlier.
Yes, I want to respect people's time. I think, providing our learners with, helping them to develop a toolbox that they can refer to when they run into problems, it can be really helpful, and can be really helpful in moving people from a place of shame to a place of hope. And I had some examples I was going to provide about the whole job application process online nowadays, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But I don't think we have time for that. I would encourage you, if you are interested in talking about this further, to reach out to us. But let me just very briefly go over the conclusion. So I think public librarians especially, but a lot of us in general experience burnout at work. And obviously, approaching our work with wholeheartedness doesn't eliminate stress, and that's not the goal. But I do think that focusing on our shared humanity can be a reminder of why we do the work that we do. And that's really the best way to prevent burnout. It's nice and gratifying to have a patron earn their GED or come in and tell us that they got the job that they had applied for. But those cases are sometimes few and far between. So it's just as important when we have someone who can log onto the computer by themselves for the first time. And those kind of little achievements are more indicative of progress rather than perfection. And hopefully they're reminders of why we do what we do. Thank you all so much for your time. These two books down here at the bottom are the two that we have referenced the most. The Gifts of Imperfection, like Leana said, that is the one that kind of formed the backbone of the presentation. It's a quick read. I would really recommend it. And then the other one that we've referenced once is the Daring, I can't see it right now, Daring Greatly. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining. Sorry for having to rush through that last little bit, but as you can tell, we get really excited about this topic, so we have a lot to say. But feel free to reach out to either one of us or both, and we'd love to chat more with you and also learn more from all of you who are also doing wholehearted work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leana and Emily. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.